Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my May wrap up and my June Pride Month TBR. I wanted to make sure I did this wrap up in part, as I said before, because these wrap ups are how I remember, what I've read. Because I've gotten really bad about not keeping kind of a diary, a journal of my reading. But also to kind of go back over books I may have mentioned and to give you a chance to know kind of what I thought about them and perhaps in a more concise form, and then to let you know kind of what I'm reading moving forward. So perhaps you'll share your thoughts with me about that, or if any of you are reading those same books, that we can exchange ideas about that as well. So I read 6 books in May, which is pretty good for me. Now, most of the books weren't particularly long, as you'll see, but among those 6 books were 3 buddy reads. And all 3 of those buddy reads were a little longer than average, and I did feel a little worried that I wouldn't be able to accomplish them all, but I did, even though I also attended my daughter's wedding Friday and Saturday of the last week of May. So I read 6 books. The first, and I'm going to go through and talk about the books in order of least, the one I liked the least, the ones I liked the most. So the book I liked the least I read this month was Fixed Bayonets by John W. Thomason. This is an American World War I novel, which is a slightly fictionalized account probably of John W. Thomason's experience as a Marine. The writing isn't very good. It doesn't really stick to one character very well, and its main interest to me is as a kind of historically accurate work of fiction about the American military experience during World War I, an area which I have some interest and have done some research and writing. It's not very good. I read this as a part of the 1900 to 1950 read-along hosted by Carey over at Books and Things, and this book was published in the 1920s. The second book, or the book I liked, my second least favorite book of the month, somewhat a surprise to me, William Faulkner's Requiem for a Nun. This book also kind of sort of fits in that 1900 to 1950 read-along category, or read-along that Carey created. And this book really was a disappointment. This is not a good book. It is, on its surface, I guess, it is a sequel to one of Faulkner's most successful and certainly his most controversial novel at the time of his life, which was called Sanctuary. And the main character in Sanctuary is the main character in Requiem for a Nun. That character's name is Temple Drake, and she is kind of at the center of the drama that goes on here. Now, part of the book, the part about Temple Drake and her story, is written as a play. Faulkner intended this to be a play or a screenplay maybe for an actress friend of his that never got made. And then interspersed between the parts of the play are these long, tedious, lifeless meanderings about history and history of the South that center around an old jailhouse that existed in Faulkner's fictitious Yoknapatawpha County seat of Jefferson. And those parts are really awful if, tedious and lifeless doesn't give you the idea. The play parts are actually kind of interesting, but probably only interesting if you've read Sanctuary and haven't interested in Faulkner in general. I think what Faulkner's trying to do here is essentially to make statements about history and the history of the South, and this is where, I think his most famous quote comes from. The history isn't really history, it's not even the past, or the past isn't history, it's not even the past, comes from here. And I think that's what Faulkner's getting at, and if that's what he's getting at, I think he fails. The third book I read, and the book kind of in one of the books in the middle that I read, was Slowness by Milan Kundera. I picked this up at the last minute, literally as I was headed out the door to my daughter's wedding. I picked this up remembering that each month I said I was going to read a book that had been on my shelf for a long period of time, but I'd never gotten around to. This book qualified, and it was perfect because it's only about 160, 150, 160 pages long. The cover describes it as kind of an opera buffa or a divertimento. It's kind of a minor work with kind of a fairly casual philosophical core, and that's exactly what it is. It was easy to read. It wasn't not enjoyable. It displays Kundera's, I believe, obsession with sex and talking about sex and putting sex at the center of the human experience in lots of ways, which you can also find in The Unbearable Lightness of Being and some of his other works. I don't know what it was with authors who began publishing in the 70s or... Zelda? Zelda, that dog... Sorry. There we go, there's an example of Zelda standing literally right beside me with her head under the desk, barking at a dog in a yard behind a fence across the street. Anyway, so it's not a very serious book, and I don't know why writers like Kundera and Garcia Marquez and, I don't know, Updike and Roth and so many others seem to be obsessed with sex as kind of the center point of human existence. Maybe I'll do some research and make a video about that, but that's kind of part of this book. You know, I can't recommend it, but if you like Kundera, you might read it. I think the writing is fun, funny, light, well executed for what it is. And then we get into the books that I actually liked. And yes, Jason, from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, I like Peter Carey's Oscar and Lucinda. I liked it. I didn't love it. I do think there's some very good things about this book. The writing is good. I think its immersiveness in 19th century Australian culture is good. I think its approach to and its recognition of the mistreatment that took place of Indigenous people in Australia by Australia's European colonial settlers is good. I have some real issues with the structure of the book, some real issues with the plot. Issues I'm willing to forgive the book perhaps if it's viewed as satire, but if it is viewed as realism, then those plot issues become bigger issues for me. Jason is hosting a read-along of Oscar and Lucinda in October. I believe he has more than a dozen, almost 2 dozen participants. If you would like to be a part of that read-along, please go over to Jason's channel. He has a community post about it, and you can respond there. I would really love to see as many people's reaction to this book as possible because of my reaction not quite being as positive as Jason's. The 2 books I like the most, I read this as, sorry Kim, I read this as a buddy read with Kim in the middle of the book march, and that actually made it much better. And you know, I did the buddy read tag for Tuesday, and buddy reads always seem to make books better, and that's true of Oscar and Lucinda, also true of John Dos Passos' 42nd Parallel. This is a part of the USA trilogy written by John Dos Passos read-along that I am doing with Jack, the Rambling Raconteur. The 42nd Parallel is the first novel in that series, and we finished that as a buddy read this month, and that has been just great fun. And Jack is, I think, an ideal buddy reader in that both of us have a tendency to jump ahead of our check-ins to leave little messages about what's going on. Jack reads faster than I am, so he's almost always ahead of me, but I enjoy getting his input. I've been impressed, again, this is a reread for me, these books. I've been impressed again with the way in which Dos Passos structures the book and how he introduces modernist elements and touches and picture things and their stream of consciousness little sections, and he introduces all those kinds of things into the novel, and at the same time has a fairly straightforward anti-capitalist, socialist, plot-based novel involving a significant number of characters moving across the United States and Mexico and I think Europe in 1919. It's just a really impressive work, and it's just been really fun to read it and get back in touch with it. You know, I did a biography video about Dos Passos, and I do believe that Dos Passos is a writer from that 1900 to 1950 era, so these books also fit in with Cage Read-Along, that really deserves a wider readership. He's not been forgotten, even though I don't think the average reader knows anything about John Dos Passos, and even maybe readers of American literature of the time period may have kind of glossed over Dos Passos in favor of Fitzgerald or Faulkner or Hemingway, etc. But he deserves to be read, and I'm enjoying that. And we'll be reading the second book in the trilogy in June. The book I enjoyed the most was a buddy read I did with Patrice Jones, and that's a buddy read of George Saunders' kind of writing instruction book called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. This was just great. This book contains the actual text of 7 classic Russian short stories by the likes of Chekhov and Turgenev and Gogol and Tolstoy, And Saunders, who taught creative writing, teaches creative writing at Syracuse University, I believe, breaks down each story, kind of gives you insights into how the stories were created, some things to pay attention to with structure. And this is useful to you whether you're a reader or a writer or both, because it helps you kind of see a little behind the scenes of how these stories are created and what makes them work. And even maybe some sections there, what makes them not work as well as they might have, which is really, really good. And getting to buddy read that with Patrice was really great. This was just really enjoyable. So there you go. There's my wrap-up of May. My June TBR is going to be Pride Month heavy, but not exclusive. And to be honest with you, I don't have very many physical copies of the books that I'm going to be reading. I am doing 2 buddy reads, one which I've already mentioned, but the other is a Pride Month buddy read, and that is a buddy read of Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, and I'm doing that buddy read with Mark Nash and Sina from Beating Around the Books. We're doing that buddy read, and that started, and we'll be having our first check-in this weekend. This is a book that I think both Mark and I saw that Sean, the Book Maniac, praised, and so I think we independently decided to read it. I found out somehow that he was doing, or I mentioned that I wanted to read it, and he invited me to join the buddy read with he and Sina. So I'm going to be doing that and looking forward to getting that book. I'm also going to be buddy reading a classic kind of work called Despised and Rejected, published under the name of the author named A.T. Fitzroy, but really the author's name was Rose Allatini. And Despised and Rejected is kind of a classic work of gay and lesbian literature, and at the same time social protest against war, pacifist literature, anti-imperialist literature. It was published, I believe, in 1916. And banned shortly after that for its sexual content and its anti-war message. Was republished most recently by Persephone Books. I have an e-copy on my Kindle, which I'll be reading, and I'm really looking forward to it. This was a fairly important book in terms of, in lots of ways, for the first time, publishing a book with a gay protagonist, and for that reason it was banned, so I'm reading that. And that book I saw on Katie at Books and Things channel. I believe that's one of the books that she read for her 1950 read-along. I'm also going to be reading Maurice by Ian Forster, again kind of a classic work of gay literature that I intended to get to last year, and I didn't, but I want to get to it this year. Number one, because Howard's Inn by Ian Forster is really one of my favorite books, and I've never then gone on and read anything else by Ian Forster, and so I want to read Maurice for that reason. And so that will also be part of my Pride Week reading. And then I'm also going to be reading a work of nonfiction called No Modernism Without Lesbians. I saw this book mentioned on Hannah's Books channel just a couple of days ago, and I immediately said, I want to read that book this month. And it is a book essentially which is kind of contains mini biographies of many of the women who were lesbians who are at the forefront of the modernist movement, including Sylvia Beach, the co-owner, director of Shakespeare and Company bookstore in Paris in the 1920s. Gertrude Stein, Alice B. Toklas are also featured in the book. And this is just exactly the kind of book that I want to read. The author of the book is Diana Souhami, and I love the early modern, I love the modernist period, I love the world of the expat world of Paris in the 1920s. I love everything that's in the title of this book. I'm interested in, and the time period I'm interested in. So I'm really looking forward to getting that book in. I ordered that book from bookshop.org, so it should be here in a couple of weeks, which, let me just also say, one of the great things about bookshop.org not having free next day delivery is that your books can arrive kind of timed out, so that you have time to read books that you have on your TBR before the next books show up. And then also I'll be reading book 2 in the USA trilogy by John Dos Passos with Jack, the Rambling Raconteur. So our buddy Reed will be reading 1919, which I'll also be reading on my Kindle. And then, if there's time, I also, as a part of the Reading Women Challenge, I also wanted to read what really is an almost completely forgotten and in some ways early feminist, American feminist novel by Woodward Boyd called The Love Legend. This will be the reread of a classic for me, which is one of the challenges they have there, I believe, on this year's reading challenges. This book is really hard to find. I'm not sure you're going to be able to find one in print. I think that may be the first time I've talked about a book that you may have a very difficult time finding at a reasonable price. But essentially, in The Love Legend, Woodward Boyd argues that women should be looking for more from life than simply to find this perfect man to love and devote themselves to. And she has characters who are artists, she has characters who are writers, she has characters who are career-driven, she has characters who are socially active, and they may or may not meet men, have relationships with men, get married, but their lives go beyond just that scope. And that's why I would refer to it as kind of an early American feminist novel, and probably one that's far more important enough not to be relegated to forgotten status. By the way, Woodward Boyd published 2 more books under that name with Scribner's, and then she published 2 books later under the name of Peggy Shane for 5 novels in total. And again, an author who probably should be better known in American literary, among American readers of American literature. Anyway, there you go. There's my confused, rambling, somewhat disjointed TBR for Pride Month and for June. Look forward to your comments about my May wrap-up and my June TBR in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.